Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys. The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. 'Cause we learned it from you, Dad. Stereo Awards. Joining me, as always, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Give him a little something, Tom.
Oh, cannot get your ship out. The internet is awash with fan theories about Star Wars, 100% of which are wrong. So allow me to add to them.
Go.
J.K. Simmons in Whiplash is a better teacher than Yoda. You teach young people.
Yeah, do
you think Yoda is setting up Luke for success?
You got beef with Yoda? Well,
I want to see this guy's, teaching credentials.
Well, how about no try? Do or do not.
Don't tell me he taught Obi-Wan, because first of all, that's not really the case.
Yeah,
Secondly,
exactly.
That turns out not to be the case.
I mean,
and
we're not.
Obi-Wan is no prize.
Yeah,
when it
exactly.
comes to, the truth and mentoring.
That it's you spoke at length during the 1997 single sequels.
I did indeed, correct.
About an American Werewolf in Paris.
Oh, specifically, yes.
And how that movie retroactively ruins movies. And there's shit that happens in the prequels that retroactively ruin these movies. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. It is very frustrating.
I should say, before we get going, though, Tom, we are not here to discuss those movies. We are going original sequels only.
Yes.
For this endeavor. Yeah. We will get to those other sequels, but not now.
Not now, yes.
We figured
too much to take on all at once.
Yeah, we did Star Trek, and if not for the month of October and us revisiting the Halloween series, we probably would have done this back to back. But obviously, if you talk about Star Trek, you got to talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not here to talk about the prequels. That is correct. Rest assured.
Or stay tuned.
Depending on your point of view.
Yeah.
From a certain point of view.
So yes. But of course, part of what wrapped up in that when you do watch those prequels is you realize the extent to which Obi-Wan might not be the greatest teacher ever.
Yeah, talk about an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, exactly. The extent to which he is a liar.
Yes.
And apparently for you, Yoda, not all that much.
No.
As a teacher.
No, I don't think he's I don't think he's a safe pair of hands at this point. Like I said, I would have trusted J.K. Simmons far more. At least he got the drum solo out of him in the end,
True. True.
Yoda singularly fails in his...
in Yoda's defense,
in his teaching plan.
In Yoda's defense, though, he's saying, you're not done yet. Don't go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, of course, Luke was going to fail.
Yeah, but he's just, he's one of those teachers who just wants to knock down their student. And that's the wrong approach with Luke. You got to know how to build him up a little bit,
right?
Before you knock him down.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I guess Yoda is not to know this, but he spends the entirety of the Empire Strikes Back having his ass handed to him. So, if Yoda would have known that, mind you, he can see the future. So he and apparently watches over Luke.
He says it's difficult to see, Tom. Difficult.
He says it's difficult to see, however, he also says he's been watching Luke all his life. So he should know that Luke deserves a break from being bashed around the head.
You are starting to sound like the parent that wants to give Luke the participation trophy.
Yeah, great. He took down the Death Star. Let credit where credit is due.
What have you done for me lately?
Well, it's great. A great moment where a classic Yoda oversimplification. He says, "Always with you, it cannot be done." Mm-hmm. And for a guy who single-handedly destroyed the Death Star, I feel like that's a little bit of a generalization there.
I think it might be an unfair characterization.
Yeah.
Just because, yes, I mean, Luke did destroy the Death Star, but it's not apples and oranges, but it's, we're talking about you becoming a Jedi. And Luke does have that thing within him of, it can't be done, I don't believe it. But I agree with you completely about everything that happened to Luke in his life. Of course that's what he thinks.
Yeah.
Because except for blowing up the Death Star...
what you're saying is you teach your students like Yoda teaches Luke.
I don't. I don't. But I'm not, I'm gonna stick up for Yoda a little bit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the original Star Wars series. This being the Everything Sequel podcast, we of course are going to be talking about The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
You say, of course.
Yes.
Whereas we in fact did not start talking about Star Wars with The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. We have approached Star Wars ass backwards.
You're
on this
true.
Podcast.
You're true.
We started
you're right,
with the Star Wars Holiday Special.
Yeah.
Which no one should start with.
Should
not be anyone's first
if you're playing along at home, we have started with the Star Wars Holiday Special, and we have done Solo.
Solo, a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And then...
Caravan of Courage.
The first Ewoks TV movie, and spoiler alert, we're doing the second.
Right.
So I think this is a mea culpa for...
But what I'm saying is...
But, technically Star Wars Holiday Special is the first Star Wars sequel, and I think we talked about
that, right.
At the time, it's just that everyone wishes it wasn't.
Yeah. But that's a different thing, too. We did it for the watch-along. It's not on our feed. So if you're not paying attention to the watch-alongs, yeah. And why aren't you? But if you're not, this is our first endeavor on this feed.
If you've never been on YouTube, if you've never been on our YouTube channel, we look competent.
Right.
Is what we're saying.
You don't have a Star Wars sequel until you have B. Arthur, I say.
That's right. Harvey Korman drinking out of his head. The high watermark of the franchise.
You're right. Now, okay. Obviously, Tom, this is our ranking and declaring episode.
It is.
So we have to rank these two movies. We have to declare good and bad.
Only to each other.
Right.
We're not dealing with the franchise at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, I've been thinking about this a lot because this program, we have been doing this podcast for 2 years and almost 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
And we started the entire series with Superman.
Yes.
Or the Superman series.
You are correct so far.
I remember on that first series sort of boldly declaring...
Shit, what did I say?
Tom, obviously there's only one right answer in ranking these movies. Superman 2 is at the top of the list. Is it not?
I sense an unfair comparison.
And of course you said, no, not at all, Superman 3.
Right.
Which leads me to my next question.
What are you proposing?
I am asking, to me, Oh, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. I mean,
No, go, ask the question.
I mean, the question for me is this a foregone conclusion?
First of all, no one is out there.
But I'm hearing your Yoda complaints and starting to think Tom's rule of 3 might come into play.
Yeah, okay. Tom's rule of 3, I admit, must have been a concern for you going into this. First of all, no one, apart from me, goes around saying Superman 3 is a better movie than Superman 2.
I know.
Whereas literally everyone in the world goes around saying Empire is better than Jedi.
Yes.
So, already...
But everyone says Superman 2 is a better movie than Superman 3, except you.
Right.
So that logic dictates that you might say, hey, I got a little something to tell you, Return of the Jedi.
Well, I think you're just trying to introduce stakes into a...
Where there are no
ranking
stakes?
Process, which is... I mean, it's beyond a foregone conclusion. The train's left the station.
All right.
As far as I'm concerned. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, like, it's interesting that no one's ever really approached this question quite the way we have.
Right.
For once. Because people sort of write off Jedi as automatically worse than the previous 2 films, but it's about whether Star Wars or Empire are better, which is better there. So this is a more interesting question because we don't have to worry about whether Empire is better than Star Wars.
Right.
But we just have to think about whether it's better than Jedi.
Agreed.
And not anything else. And not anything else in the wider franchise.
Right. Because as we said, we're just just these movies against each other.
Yeah. Just a couple of sequels hanging out looking for a good time.
And I mean, normally
no Skywalker saga.
Right.
No Star Wars stories. No endless Disney Plus TV series.
So bitterness from fandom should not enter into this equation.
Right. Well, except George Lucas hasn't given us that grace, has he?
True.
Because
True.
The truth is, if you are watching or rewatching,
because the truth is, there's 4 movies to talk about.
Yes, if you're watching or rewatching these movies, chances are you are streaming them on Disney Plus, which means you are getting the most recent special edition of both movies, which is not the original release version of these movies.
Correct.
I mean, this is, for most people, this is a given, but it's worth pointing out because, for the purposes of this podcast, Mike has watched the original versions, which he has. You know, I remember a while back you said to me, "Should I watch these?" And I said, "Smoke them if you got them."
Yeah,
why? Right. Why would you subject yourself to the Disney Plus versions if you have access to these?
Yes.
Whereas I don't have that luxury, so I only watched the Disney Plus versions. But just to clarify, I have seen the original versions enough.
Right.
And I'm basing all my ranking and declaring on that. The special edition doesn't come into it, only as a kind of additional point of comparison. Like the subject of conversation about what's going on there. But it doesn't affect my ranking and declaration at all.
Okay.
Because I know,
and same for me.
I know these 2 movies. I had a commercially owned VHS of The Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
I had an off-air recording of Return of the Jedi, which even with commercial breaks, interstitial logos, and it was around Christmas time on British television, so there was a phone number going across the bottom of the screen for a Christmas care line. Even with all of that, it was still less busy than the special edition of Return of the Jedi. That was still sparser, visually, than what Lucas did to Return of the Jedi.
I'll tell you something that really surprised me, because I actually watched both versions.
I know you did, and I knew you would.
Yeah, because I'm sick.
You are. quite sick.
But the one thing that surprised me is that if you take away the first act and the very last part of the third act in Jedi, that movie is pretty much untouched.
Wow. Okay.
From the special editions.
Whereas the rest of it is, you know, giving a teddy bear to a child and saying, "Where did the bad man touch you?"
Fuck.
Come on, I mean, let's, you know what I mean? I appreciate what you're saying, you know, but
I'm just saying it surprised
the damage
me.
is already done by that point.
No, I
right?
agree, and I'm just saying it surprised me,
And
because I
we'll
remembered
get
it
into this...
differently.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, I'm all for giving George Lucas the benefit of the doubt, and I am more forgiving towards him on a number of issues than most Star Wars fans are, and audiences generally. But the special editions...
It's funny you say that.
Special editions rankle me in a way that nothing else he's done in the Star Wars franchise,
me too,
or the Indiana Jones franchise ever has.
Agreed.
It's really interesting.
I don't know
if you've seen the documentary. I know. Yeah, I don't think you think that. I appreciate you agreeing with me, but I don't think you think that.
I think, Crystal Skull.
We'll get there.
Yeah, someday.
Have you ever seen a documentary called "The People versus George Lucas"?
No.
So it's a fan-made documentary, and it's an attempt to sort of make the case for and against, you know, George
the
Lucas
man himself
in the era of prequels, in the India and Crystal Skull, and it's a really nuanced and balanced piece of, you know, argument filmmaking. And there's a really compelling defense of the special editions of the Star Wars movies, and they have art historians come on and talk about how the Renaissance masters used to go back to their old paintings, and so what we see is a composite of what they've done over the years with the work. It's not what was originally put out there as the work itself. And so that, you know, even with that, I still can't accept it. You know what I mean? It's like, I still think it's an abomination. But
right.
You know, I realize there is a case to be made for what he's doing artistically. So that's how far in the hole I am with the special editions. Like, I understand that there is there is a legitimate art history counterpoint argument to what I'm saying, and I still cannot accept it.
Well, I have to say, like, even as you were describing that, the thought in my head was, I don't accept that argument. Bullshit.
Yeah,
I just.
It's a good argument.
It is a fair argument.
It would stand up in court.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't disagree
and I'm
with
glad
that.
This
but
documentary presented it against all the fan backlash, because
the acid within
a lot
me,
of that is unfair,
the acid within me built up enough for me to say, just like squash that down and say, bullshit. Yeah. I do not accept.
Right, and I think, you know, what I've realized in doing this podcast, and we've dealt with some kind of director's cuts and where you know, that have been made retrospectively, like 10, 20 years after the fact, and I realized that I really appreciate the historicity of films. Like, I want to see them in their original context more,
right
more than I want them to fix what might be their mistakes, you know. And in some cases these films are flawed and they do need fixing, but you should never do it. Right. because what you do to fix it will automatically be worse and make it feel inauthentic.
Yeah.
To what it is.
To what it was.
To what it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's all, you know, it's gonna look dated. You know, if you when whatever time period you fix it in, that fix is gonna look dated.
Right.
But for some reason, and I said this to you off mic, for some reason, the original context, even though it may have dated more than the aesthetics
less
at the time
offensive.
which was fixed, It just feels more
because
authentic.
it feels more authentic because it's from the time it was made.
Right, I prefer that kind of dated.
Yes, me too.
To the other kind of dated.
Because that was the other big takeaway on watching.
Which again doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yeah.
But
no, I think it does make sense because
I don't know. I feel like I feel like old man yelling at cloud about this. But...
No, I will be an old man yelling about how I should be yelling.
Yeah.
From that particular subject, because that was the other thing that really struck me when I was watching the special editions. I mean, most especially Jedi, because when you get that bar scene and when you get the celebration at the end, it's imperfect in a 1997 kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also intellectual property issues here, isn't there? Because you remove one piece of in that instance, you're removing one piece of music and replacing another.
Two pieces of music.
I mean,
beginning and the end.
But Billy D. Williams is barely clapping to the beat of the original song. He's definitely not clapping to the beat of this replacement song.
Right.
He's already off the beat. He's really off the beat this time. So. It's clear it's not meant to be in the movie.
Right.
When you watch it.
What I think we talked about
all the special edition fixes, when you watch it, you're like, this was clearly not meant to be in the movie.
And I think we talked about this off mic because I think they're also objectively worse choices.
They're definitely choices from a time in George Lucas's life and career where he's less capable of making the kinds of choices that he made in the original movies. Yeah. That's as far as I'll go for now.
All right.
As we said, we're not talking about the prequels yet.
All right.
Maybe ever.
So, I mean, I always ask you this. For even a second, is any of this difficult for you? For either ranking or declaring?
No, but I think it's good to just check in.
It was interesting to me. I'm with you. Not a second of it was difficult for me, but it was interesting to watch these movies with a different eye.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Specifically watch them for the purposes of the podcast. That was interesting.
We talked during, our Star Trek episodes, and you brought up a good point that there are these kind of popular culture narratives of what you're supposed to think about these films, which kind of get in the way of what you might actually think about them if you just watch them. But
it's interesting
I think it's good to sort of walk these movies through those. Not that I necessarily came out with a different outcome, but I think it's good to just walk it through those because one of these movies is looked down upon and one of these movies is highly rated.
Yeah.
And so it's just good to sort of check in, see what the barometer is.
What I think is interesting is that there's a difference for me between the Star Trek.
Yeah, there is. There's a huge difference.
And the Star Wars in the sense of what we were talking about, the broad public opinion.
Yeah.
Where I was saying when we were doing Star Trek that the broad public opinion has affected the way I thought about these movies. And then when I watch them, I think, no, that's wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah.
But it has not affected my viewing of these two movies from Star Wars. The broad public opinion.
I think it's not. Yeah, it's never. It's
not
never
in the same way that it has for Star Trek.
Well, I think
that's interesting to me. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that might be opposite for me. I think I'm more affected by the idea of how great Empire is versus how bad Jedi is. But upon viewing them for the purposes of this podcast, I was able to sort of like rationalize both sides of that, right? To sort of take on basically it's like take on both arguments. Is Empire as good as it's supposed to be? Is Empire as bad as it's supposed to be?
Wait, what'd you say? Did you say Empire is as bad as it's supposed to be?
No, I said is Empire as good as it's supposed to be, and is Jedi as bad as it's supposed to be.
Okay.
You swap them over in your head.
I thought you said Empire
You,
and
you, you're
Empire.
you're paranoid that I'm gonna say Jedi is a better movie, and you are creating a popular culture narrative in your own mind about my opinions about this film.
Fine. I mean, it's time. Although I think we've
Yeah.
already kind of done it. But
Well, I think good bad is the more
yeah, right. I agree.
is whether I don't know.
So in
There's,
ranking, to
yeah,
me, our foregone conclusion is the foregone conclusion, and
yeah,
Empire is at the top of the list, and Jedi is second.
correct.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I tried to keep these movies separate from the rest of the Star Wars franchise in all its iterations,
That was easy
but
for me, actually.
but I actually don't think I did. But I also don't think it matters.
I did. I barely
Like,
except for moments where the prequels fuck up things that characters say directly in these movies.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, I just mean in terms of ranking.
no, yeah, I know what you mean,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is those are the only moments where I even thought of any of the other movies.
Well, yeah. I mean, I couldn't really separate it, but I realized that this ranking is gonna stand for everything.
Gotcha.
Everything outside the original trilogy. It's gonna be 1-2. It's gonna be this 1-2 punch wherever you put it. So and
Meaning
just,
it's at the top of your list for everything, or
yeah. Well, it'll be like 1 and 2, no matter
yeah.
what happens, no matter what is. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Maybe there will be a film at some point, but
No, yeah, I'm exactly the same.
They haven't made it in 40 years.
Right,
So,
exactly.
So let's just assume they won't because it's not going in the right direction. But that made me think. In a wider sense, because I wanted to think about these as films in their own right.
Sure.
I was kind of thinking, is there any way you can cut it where this wouldn't be the order? Like, I don't know.
No, no.
Yeah,
No.
there you go. So just to bring some perspective to it.
But I
Because it's easy, it's very easy to rank, but when you put it in those other contexts, you realize that ease with which you can go, this is first, this is second, and everything else is pales in comparison, is kind of significant.
No, yeah, for sure. It's
Because
absolutely significant.
Especially when you think of how
But
rubbish Jedi is sometimes. You're like,
right.
guys, think about what came afterwards and
Really think about it.
really think about it.
Yeah. Because but do you
think
think
about how think about how in general filmmaking competency has gone down since that movie.
right. But my question to you is this more of us old men shaking our fists? Would we be in the minority putting these two movies at the top of our lists?
Well, when I say old man yells at cloud, that's already a reference that's about 20 years out of date. So that tells you all you need to know about where I'm coming from in the popular culture timeline. I mean, well, it's partly that. It's partly old man yells at cloud, and it's partly, I think, and you watched Light and Magic, and I've watched it recently, the documentary about Industrial Light and Magic. And just to sort of think about how breakthrough these two films are in terms of what they're presenting on film, I really don't think you can underestimate them. And I really don't think you should mix them in with everything else that's happened in the Star Wars franchise, because at the time of their release, they were the absolute best and most successful version of what they were trying to do.
Both of these sequels have won Oscars for their visual effects, in which they were the only film. It was a special award.
Yeah, you had to give them something, right?
Yeah, it was, wow, we can't believe that. Here, have this.
And the Academy doesn't do that often. You know,
Right.
There's like one or two examples of it throughout history of like, we need to create, you know, Planet of the Apes makeup was one of them. It's like, we don't know what this is for, but you deserve this.
Right.
But just, you know, sort of both that fact when you're watching them, and also, and this is the crucial part for me, and I don't know why it never struck me before, but it really did this time. Probably Light and Magic is the reason. It looks effortless.
Right.
We don't have to go far back. Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The effects in that could not look more effortful.
Yeah.
This is completely effortless.
Well,
Everything
but when you
feels like it's part of a world that exists.
But when you watch Light and Magic and you see sort of working against the clock,
I mean, it is just
and how
incredible.
difficult it was, it's all the more impressive. And there were things.
I don't even think you need that context. The fact that I don't know of many films that pull this trick with a completely fictional universe that feels whole and comprehensive and plausible, and yet it's puppets talking to people. It's stop motion creatures with live action. It's models on their own.
Well, and let's go back.
And you're like, I believe it. I believe this is all happening.
Yes,
in the same place.
That's the other thing is, I mean, obviously we always cut the head off the snake and we don't talk about the original, but this series is the reason I love movies, which I think I mentioned to you the other night off air.
Yeah.
And part of that is being 5 years old and watching Star Wars. And when you watch Light and Magic and you see the very first shot of the movie of the Imperial ship,
Right.
Running down this small Alliance ship, and the sense of awe that they wanted that to inspire, that's literally the feeling that I remember seeing as a 5-year-old in the theater. The sense of wonder, the sense of awe, the sense of scale, everything about it. And like you were just describing, the entire world was wholly seen and honest and real. And it's funny that, movies that have come after it don't have that feeling.
No, there's always one element that looks like it's coming. I mean, whether it's sound or visuals, it looks like it was recorded elsewhere and put into the movie. And for some reason, and it's interesting that you mentioned being 5 years old, because when it comes to the Empire Strikes Back and how highly rated it is, I really wanted to poke holes in it.
Yeah, right.
In terms of nostalgia, it's like because it's hard for me to believe that they have never achieved this again.
Yeah.
In the Star Wars
and it's
franchise.
funny you say
God
that.
knows they've made enough movies and TV shows at this point that they should be getting close.
Right. And I wanted to do the same thing.
I'm like, is this just an illusion created by nostalgia that this works as well as I think it does?
Right.
But I could not.
You know what's funny,
Pete,
Tom?
Yeah.
What's funny for me is I was doing the same exact thing, and I ended up having more respect.
Yes, exactly. 100%.
Like
150%.
It astonished me even more. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing sometimes, and like you, I think you mentioned this earlier. There's nobody lately that I would like to give more shit to than George Lucas, but I found myself defending him on so many fronts as I rewatched these movies and listened to commentaries and watched the reissues along with the actual original movies. And one thing I'll take away is, putting his teaching practices aside, Yoda himself, I'm with George Lucas. I thought that was it was such a remarkable performance. I thought it should have been nominated for an Academy Award.
I mean, it's a given. It's one of the greatest achievements in puppetry, in acting.
Yeah.
One of the greatest characters.
It's so good.
Of that era of film.
It's so good that the movie's director, Irvin Kershner, would often give direction to the puppet.
Yeah.
And Frank Oz would say, "Talk to me, please."
Can you imagine like Irvin Kershner, who already sounds like a Muppet,
Right?
And George Lucas, who already sounds like a Muppet, talking to Frank Oz as Yoda.
Right. What we need to do here.
So it's interesting because I know, like, in recent years, people, and I'm using the term loosely because I'm talking about Joss Whedon here, have tried to poke holes in the reputation of The Empire Strikes Back, saying, you know, it's an incomplete story, has an unsatisfying ending. But I just don't see. I actually think, and this is another revelation for me, I actually think the reason both these movies succeed, but in particular why Empire succeeds, is it restricts itself to telling the middle part
of a trilogy.
The story.
Yeah.
And then Jedi tells the final part of the story, and it never overreaches.
Never.
Either way, like it doesn't do too little, it doesn't do too much. And when you think about that, I know we're not supposed to be, but you think about it in comparison to other Star Wars movies, it starts to add up, right? Why this is so much better.
Right.
Because you sort of think, well, Phantom Menace didn't tell any story, and then the next two films are saddled with telling all of the story.
Yeah.
And you think about Last Jedi told too much of the story, Rise of Skywalker had nothing left to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you sort of think, wow, God, maybe the genie, Joss Whedon, I say to you, maybe the true genius of these films in storytelling terms is they know their limits. They know where the story, they tell exactly as much of the story as they need to tell. And that goes down to like deferring explanations for things that's happening.
Yeah, and
Empire makes a decision to say, we've got a big retcon to explain, but we're not going to explain it now. That's the next film's problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the next film picks up the mantle and does the best it can.
And
amazing.
I also completely...
It's like throwing a ball.
Yeah, and I completely disagree that it's unsatisfying, because it wasn't even unsatisfying to me
look at the source.
When I was 8.
Guy can't even write dialogue. I mean, look at the source. Guy's been coasting in Hollywood for so many years with literally no talent. Of course he thinks that.
That's fantastic. All right,
but I wanted to take that seriously because I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by any counter argument to Empire. Well, we're doing good and bad now, aren't we? So I'll save it. But I'm fascinated.
No, don't save it. I mean, we're here. We're there.
Well, so... no, I'm fascinated by the counter arguments because I don't see them and I can't see them.
No, yeah.
I can't let that happen.
You want to know why you can't see them?
And I can't let that happen.
Because they're not there.
I don't think they are, but I'm fascinated by anyone who has any issues.
Right.
And I want to take those into account.
No, agreed. And, you know, it was really something, like I said before, these movies could do no wrong for me as a kid. And so watching them more critically with a more critical eye, and basically seeing no deficiencies in one, and the deficiencies I do see in the other were more interesting than anything else.
Oh, wow, I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's a really healthy way to look at these films. Yeah.
Now the question is, could I poke enough holes to say it's a bad movie?
Well, I mean, I just want to deal with the other end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Upon rewatching, let's face it, the inferior version of The Empire Strikes Back that exists.
Right.
I can only reconfirm that this is the greatest Star Wars movie, a great movie in its own right, and one of the greatest sequels of all time.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do about that.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
so good.
exactly.
It's so good that even George Lucas barely messed with it.
Right.
In the special edition.
In the special edition.
Compared to the other movies. I mean, that's how good it is.
Right.
Even George Lucas understands that he
it's
shouldn't.
so good that George Lucas, who, like, it was all he wanted to do was to fucking tinker around with these movies.
Yeah.
Found that he couldn't.
Yeah, he just went fair play.
Yeah.
Fair play. Which is something.
And it's, I think we were talking about this again the other night. The things that he would end up tinkering and fucking with is like changing the buildings.
Yeah. Adding shoe leather.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the best he could come up with. By the way, reusing a shot from Return of the Jedi in the process. It's like, way to make your films look cheaper, George.
That's great.
Taken one of the great technical achievements of cinema and made it look cheaper.
Fantastic.
Anyway.
Well, I we are in lockstep on Empire. I, like you, think it is the greatest Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And I, like you, think it's one of the greatest sequels ever.
Yeah. Believe the hype, it's a sequel to...
Mm-hmm.
to misquote Public Enemy.
Well, and of course that leaves us with Jedi.
It does. What do you want to say about that?
I want to say, like I
I'll
said,
let you take the lead on this.
It was very interesting to watch this movie with a more critical eye.
Yeah.
We were
no assumptions.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the grand public's perception of this movie.
The Grand Republics.
The Grand Republics, and basically the fandom's view has, I think, molded into Harrison Ford's view. And,
who, by the way, evidently does not want to be there.
Right. But I will say emphatically, it is not my view.
No, it's not mine either.
And one of the things that's so successful, when you think about, say, the Lord of the Rings series, both Star Wars and that first Lord of the Rings movie, it's a straight ahead narrative. You don't have multiple storylines.
It's a map.
Right.
It's a literal map.
Literal map.
It's really funny on one of your Project 1982 episodes. You were talking about the Dark Crystal, and you referred to a review that called it watered down Tolkien.
Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, that's all you can do to Tolkien. Otherwise, it's just maps and singing. Who wants to watch a movie that's just maps and singing? Right?
That's amazing.
Carry on.
Well, so my overall point was, when you get to Empire, you have multiple storytelling going on. And even Lucas said, I like that more. I find it more interesting. And
yeah, he totally runs with it in Phantom Menace.
I'll say.
No, he does, and literally, you have a film of documentary of him behind the scenes saying, we did in the last one we had multiple storylines. In this one we're going to do 4. Like, he literally says it.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
talk about upping the ante.
Right.
And diminishing returns.
But what I want to say about Jedi is, what I really noticed on this viewing was that Act 1 and Act 2, most of Act 2, I mean, you have multiple storylines, but you don't really have multiple storylines until you get to Act 3. And that's when that movie becomes great.
Interesting.
The third act of that movie, I think, stands up with almost anything in the Star Wars saga. I like it that much. And yes, this is a good movie.
Well, I'm also going to call it a good movie, but I think for different reasons than you, which is good. Gives us something to talk about.
Yeah.
Not that I disagree with anything that you've said, but it
something stands out more to you?
Something stands out more to me, which is that So we just did Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that as a point of comparison. When we talked about Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, I said that I didn't understand that people actively having problems with it. I could
Right.
understand why people were underwhelmed by it, but I don't understand people having problems with anything that's on screen.
Yeah, right.
I understand why people have problems with things
In
that are
Jedi.
on screen in Return of the Jedi. I understand this movie has problems.
Yeah.
Like I don't disagree with that perception. However, and I think the other part of it is that this is where it's hardest for me to unravel this film from the rest of the franchise, because if you look at it in retrospect, it's very clear this is the gateway to a lot of bad tendencies in the Star Wars franchise.
Yes,
It's
that's the other
undeniable.
thing. Yeah.
But in this context, I think it absolutely gets away with it.
Mm-hmm.
It amounts to a good film, and largely, I think, and this is what struck me this time watching it. Largely, I think, on the strength of a handful of absolutely, undeniably outstanding sequences, which I don't know how you can not come away with from them cheering.
Right.
And this movie has enough of those to call it a good movie anyway. I think I actually probably agree with you as well that, there are sections of this movie where it's absolutely firing on all cylinders, but even when it's not, it'll throw in a sequence that will just
Yeah,
blow your
right,
mind.
right.
It will just blow your mind, and you're like, I've still never seen anything that achieves this level of whatever it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
I might have quibbles. I might have,
with problems.
Yeah, I might nitpick. I might have problems, especially in the first 2/3 of the movie.
It's a little more than nitpicking. I think there are some, but again,
No, there are problems, but
it's hard to separate that from what the series is going to be.
But there's not wholesale problems that I see in other, where an entire section I can just do without. Well, I think you were kind of saying the same thing just a second ago, right? Where you're saying even if you have problems, there'll be something there. There'll be something there.
Well, there's a gray area between those 2 points of view, which is that do we need to spend as much time on this as we do?
Gotcha. All right.
And that's a big issue with this. But not that it doesn't need to be there at all, but do we need 20-30 minutes of it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of a lot of Jedi, and I can't really ignore that. Does it bother me? Not really.
Yeah,
not
me
really
neither.
At all. But I have to take that into account because, you're putting it up against one of the best films of the 1980s. You can't, and the specter of the rest of the
canon.
franchise.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is a movie that's being attacked from both ends.
Right.
Of itself.
Yeah, you're right.
And yet, if you kind of, let's just cut to the, cut off the head of the snake, cut off its tail. Let's just look at the belly. It's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
right.
a good belly.
Yeah.
I like the look of that
That's
belly.
a delicious belly. All right. So, we have some interesting things to talk about, but we both feel that Empire Strikes Back is one of the greatest sequels of all time.
Yeah.
And we both think that both of these movies are good.
Yeah, and let's say as a headline, Return of the Jedi is better than most people think it is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was curious if we would be of like minds for these particular two movies.
I think you're right to be concerned, but I think I think the madness begins with the prequels for me.
Yeah.
In terms of where my opinion from the rest of civilization diverges.
Okay.
That's when it gets weird. And that's where I'm out there on an island all of my own. But at this stage, I think I'm still operating within polite society.
Very good then. Well, I'll look forward to that.
No, you won't. It's gonna depress you.
Oh, that's good.
You think Rise of the Machines was hard.
That's great. I will happily argue.
You'll have to. You'll have no choice.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. All
All
right.
To quote Luke, I see the good in you. Prequels.
I say, give in to your hatred.
Yeah. Most people did.
Yeah.
If Star Wars if anything can be said about Star Wars fandom, it's that most people now readily give in to their hatred.
Yes, exactly. All right. Anything left for you before we sign off?
No, I want to get talking about this
Remarkable
movie.
couple of movies.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know where we stand. We love The Empire Strikes Back. We like Jedi way more than we think most people do. What say you? Where do you stand? You're going to have to let us know. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here of the How Dare You Awards. When you hear us next, we'll be talking The Empire Strikes Back. Say goodbye, Tom.
I'm afraid the deflector shield will be quite operational when your friends arrive.
You're starting to make it sound like the melody of a song.
I know the prequels will kind of consolidate this, but I think Yoda and the Emperor are two sides of the same coin. They're both sarcastic as fuck, and they hate Luke.
Right.
They direct most of that venom to Luke. I think the Emperor should have reached out to Yoda as his apprentice.
They could have combined forces.
Yeah.
Man, you got a beef. You got a beef with Yoda. I look forward to.
I've got a beef with Yoda, and I like the Emperor as a person more than most people do. Don't you think when his eyes are kind of sparkling?
Yes.
Like in those close-ups.
Well, you picked.
He looks kind of cute.
Yeah, you picked the perfect line. You picked the perfect line where I thought, man, what? That's just the greatest amount of sarcasm, like the most ingenious amount of go fuck yourself, Luke.
There was a lot of criticism of introducing such a melodramatic character as the Emperor so late on in the series. But it's lines like that that made me think Ian McDiarmid knows exactly what movie he's in.
Yep. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for our ranking and declaring.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.